Hi, I'm Russell Sturgis from EAP Mentor, and welcome to this week's blog, which is entitled Mindful Divorce. Now, I know that seems to be nearly a paradox, but I just recently have had the opportunity to be exposed to people going through, a series of people, variety of people going through separations and divorce, and I thought maybe it was timely to be able to provide some insight into how difficult relationship situations, of which separation divorce would be probably one of the most difficult, could be managed in such a way where inner peace would still be able to be sustained by either one or both parties, and that there's a way that divorce and separation could be approached where there was honour and love and respect. And I know that seems kind of ridiculous, given if there was honour and love and respect, why would there even be the need for divorce? And that's another issue and a question that probably we'll cover over the next few weeks. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to provide some insight into how mindfulness can be applied and how awareness can be used to make mindfulness more of a reality in this situation. And I'm going to give some very simple but usable suggestions in terms of what you can do to maintain your inner peace while going through these challenging times. But before I do that, I'd like to just share some statistics around marriage and divorce here in Australia. This is from the 2015 statistics presented by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the very first thing that they've indicated in there is that the number of marriages have decreased and the number of divorces have increased since 2012, so that there's been definitely a shift in less people getting married and more people being divorced. The average duration of a relationship from marriage to divorce is 12 years, which is kind of bizarre when you think about what it is that we're attempting to do when we commit to marriage. It's kind of ironic right now that we're dealing with a debate in Australia around a plebiscite around essentially around gay marriage. And it's kind of ridiculous to think that we're going to be spending a huge amount of money trying to determine whether or not it's okay for gay people to be married, and yet it would seem that the institution of marriage itself is failing, and that maybe we need to rethink, or we need to give some new considerations to how marriage is approached and how people approach their relationships, and that maybe the money would be better spent on educating people about being mindful in relationships. But anyway, that's an aside. 75% of marriages are now carried out by celebrants, which means that less than 25% are being performed by the church. This would suggest and would be reflective of the shift in the consciousness of people from seeing the institution of marriage being a religious thing as opposed to being more of a social component. What's interesting is that they've now introduced relationship registers, and of course this is where you can go and register a relationship without having to go through the process of having to be married. And of course this is to accommodate people who are in same-sex relationships, but it could be used by anyone. And of course there's been I think that they've indicated that there was nearly a 60 or 70% increase in the last 3 years, and of course that's because it's become more well known and understood. 81% of people who are being married now have lived together prior to getting married. So 8 out of 10 people that get married have been living together beforehand. So they already have this sense of who each other are, who the other person is. Yet the duration of these marriage relationships is only 12 years. So once again, it sort of alludes to this whole idea that maybe we don't really understand the dynamics of healthy relationship, and And so kind of interesting that these statistics are showing up in the way that they are. 43% of marriages are sort of annulled where both partners make a declaration around it. In terms of filing for divorce, 32% are women. On top of that, 43%, so women on their own, and 25% of men on their own. The other interesting statistic here is that the average age for marriage now is 30 for males and 28 years for females. The average age for divorce is 45 for men and 43 for women. So this is where we see this sort of average in terms of the number of years that people are staying in marriages, and also these age groups in terms of what's going on in people's lives that have them making these decisions of going into and out of relationships at these age groups is, I think, kind of interesting. Okay, so there's some general statistics about divorce but what it doesn't do is talk about the number of relationships where people aren't married and relationships break up, and all the issues besides the issues of divvying up property and those types of things. All the issues are still there, and of course, if they've been together long enough, those issues still exist, even in relationships that haven't been created within the framework of a marriage. And so those statistics aren't being given to us in terms of what's happening in our society. But once again, those of you who are listening to this or watching this video, I'm sure you have lots of friends who aren't married, who have dealt with these same issues within living arrangements where they're living together. They're still dealing with the separation issues. And for many of us, we get to see some pretty nasty stuff happening. It's very rare for us to see two people go through a process of separation mindfully, to be able to go through a place where there's sustained respect and a sense of honouring of the other person. So I'd like to, over the next few weeks, do a series where we're going to talk about the sorts of things that would make a mindful divorce possible. And I'm going to give some hints, as I've indicated a little bit earlier. So what is mindful divorce? Well, it as I've written in the blog, it requires first a real clear sense of what mindfulness is. And from the perspective of EAP Mentor, our definition of mindfulness is remembering that you have a choice as you are confronted with life circumstances. And of course, that choice is between the program pattern of behaviour or the habits that have you repeat patterns of behaviour from over many years that doing the same thing, getting the same result, or having become, and this is where the word awareness comes in here, having become aware of an alternative way of being able to approach this particular situation. In this case, it's divorce, and being aware that there is an alternative. Now, mindfulness is about the developing the ability to just remember that there are alternatives. It's not about trying to fix it. It's not about trying to force yourself into having to adopt the alternative ways of approaching what's going on. But it is about allowing awareness to become fully expanded enough and entertained enough that it develops its own neural pathway, which is the way in which the brain engages the realization that the alternative is a valid route for you to take. So if I can sum it up, being mindful around divorce is being able to clearly identify an alternative approach which is not only loving for yourself but loving for the other person, and to be able to entertain that as a possibility while still entertaining the fact that it could be done the way that it's always been done, which is done with a lot of bitterness and anger and frustration and all the things that we typically see in a separation situation. As with anything that we talk about in EAP around mindfulness, so essentially what mindfulness does is that it helps to reinforce the possibility of an alternative which essentially sets up a neural pathway in the brain that says this could be done differently. And of course, the more we entertain the possibility of it being done in a more loving way, without us having to actually adopt it, without us having to actually exercise that option, we do strengthen that neural pathway. And in the process of strengthening that one, we weaken the old ways in which we engage divorce and separation. So what happens is this practice of mindfulness sees this strengthening of the other option. And of course, what we do know about neural pathways is that imagined and reality share the same neural pathway. And there's a very interesting phenomenon that happens, is that when you've imagined the alternative sufficiently, what happens is you nearly find yourself being invited to start to exercise that and to participate in that alternative, more loving approach to what it is that you're being mindful about. And as you become more committed and you start to exercise this new neural activity, then you start to see a wasting and a pruning of this old way. And so this idea of becoming more compassionate to self and other begins to expand during this process. So I'm going to be introducing ideas over these next few blogs about how it's possible to exercise and to develop an awareness in terms of being mindful of an option that is compassionate to yourself and to other people, so that this exercise is done with respect, with mutual respect, and done with love and consideration of the other person. And who knows, in the process of doing that, it may even lead you to the point where you get to see the other person and yourself differently, and you never know, it might even be able to salvage something that looks like it may have been unsalvageable previously. So, the first hint is in the blog, which is about this whole notion that, and I just want to touch on it here before I finish, this whole notion that nobody can make us feel anything. Nobody else is responsible for how we feel. So the whole notion of saying in an argument, you make me feel blah, 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 and off we go, and we project responsibility for how we feel onto somebody else or something else, there's no such thing. How we feel about what's going on in our life is totally up to us. The only thing is that most of us don't realise that we have stewardship over our feelings, that we have accountability and responsibility for that, and that in fact nobody else can make us feel any way other than the way that we choose to feel. Have a read of that in the blog, something to think about, and I look forward to sharing some thoughts with you about mindful divorce and separation over the next few blogs. If you want to be able to find out more about living life more mindfully, then go to the website eapmentor.com. The other thing I'd highly recommend, we've got a fabulous Facebook page at EAP Mentor. If you write that in when you go to Facebook, and you'll find our page, like it. And each day of the week we put up blogs that are inspiring and ones that help you to actively participate in things that help you to be more mindful and aware. And we get to share stories with you of people whose lives have changed as a result of living with more mindfulness and awareness. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks. Bye.